Hello, I'm John Morris, founder of the internet's largest accessible travel website, wheelchairtravel.org. It's such a pleasure to be with you today here at the world's first Virtual Abilities Expo. Now, obviously, given the risks associated with the coronavirus, we aren't able to be together today. And for people all across the world, this disruption to normal life has forced the cancellation of many trips and vacations. But in this time where the pace of life may seem a little slower, I think it's the perfect time to think about future travel, trips we plan to take after the coronavirus, or whenever we're ready to travel again. Each of us has a different opinion on when travel should resume. Many Americans have already started. It is summertime, after all. But the decision on when is entirely up to you, and your decision should be made when, after consulting with your friends, family members, and doctors, you feel comfortable to travel again. So today, in the short amount of time that I have to share with you, I want to talk about 4 different topics. What it means to travel accessibly and what those possibilities are, choosing the right trip, the key steps to planning an accessible trip, and I want to talk about a few of my favorite travel stories that will hopefully inspire you to travel with a disability. Let's get started. I think of accessible travel as possibility, filled with opportunities. And so accessible travel is something that is open to people of many different types of abilities. I put up this slide right now. Who benefits from accessible travel? And accessible travel and universal design open the world and our communities to so many different types of people. Me as a power wheelchair user, but also my friends who maybe use crutches or canes or walkers or prosthetic devices. There are so many people who can benefit from accessible design. And that is the course of the world right now, creating accessibility to welcome new types of customers. Accessible travel is possibility, so it opens the door to experiences and activities, both new and old. Some of my favorite things to do when I travel are to interact with attractions that help me dive into the history and culture of a destination, that give me a chance to meet local people and understand more about their lives. I also love going to events, football games, baseball games, concerts, and going to these events with my friends. That is always so much fun. And I also like spending time in the outdoors, going to national parks. In the United States, that's a great opportunity for us because we have so many national parks that are free for disabled people to access. So let's talk for a moment about choosing the right trip. Whether you are a new or seasoned traveler, we're all having to think hard about the trips we might want to take next. Are some trips more risky than others? Are some more accessible? Generally, I break trips into several broad categories. First, road and rail trips. These might allow us to be more socially distanced, and they are in many cases more accessible too. Driving to a national park with your family, where you can limit contact with other people to the greatest extent possible, might be a great idea in these times. Of course, for those who might not have or want to drive their own vehicle, trains and buses can be a great choice for accessible transportation. You will be a bit more exposed to others, however. The second category is domestic air travel. These trips generally require flights of less than 5 or 6 hours and require much less planning than a trip abroad. Depending on your disability, you may have concerns about air travel, like how to get on and off the plane, where to sit, how your wheelchair will be treated, and so forth. I'll tell you how to find answers to these questions in just a bit. The third category is international travel. These trips require flights that can be much longer. The longest flight in total time from takeoff to touchdown that I have ever taken was 17 hours 50 minutes. So these long flights lead us to think about questions like comfort, pressure relief, and going to the bathroom. But in the era of COVID, there is something more we have to consider. Is the destination safe? Are you even allowed to go there? Or are borders closed? These questions need answers because you don't want to fly across an ocean only to be refused entry at the border. The fourth and final category is cruising. I'm not going to discuss this type of travel today because while many people find cruising to be perfect for accessible travel, I do not believe that now is the right time to cruise. There are actually still people marooned on cruise ships that departed in March because no country will grant them docking privileges. You don't want to be stuck at sea. So, which of these is right for you? I would start by weighing your concern over the coronavirus. If you are highly apprehensive, perhaps it's best to opt for a road trip with your family, limiting your interactions with others whenever and however possible. If you feel more confident in your ability to stay safe, or efforts to defeat the virus appear to be going more successful, perhaps you do consider that trip across the country or abroad. You're the only person who can make that decision. And while travel is likely to be depressed for some time, I am confident that it won't be too long before we can begin exploring once again. So, how do we plan an accessible trip? Whether you plan to travel before a coronavirus vaccine is available or not, you can use these 5 tips to plan your next accessible vacation, whenever that may be. The first tip is to research the destination's accessibility. And there are a couple ways that you can do that, but I want to talk to you about some things that are worth keeping in mind. Number one, in accessible travel, we must think of every need. So, what type of bed do I need? Will the hotel be accessible to me? What are the facilities like? What sort of medical equipment will I need on the journey? What will I need to take with me? And how can I make sure that I have everything that I need where I'm going? Number 2, ground transportation. It's very important to find accessible ground transportation because we don't want to get stuck at the airport. We need a way to get from the airport to the hotel and from the hotel to the various attractions and things that we want to do. Accessible activities. What at this destination is going to be accessible to us? What are some of the activities that we'll be able to participate in? Are the restaurants that we'd like to go to accessible? Is shopping accessible? All the things that you would want to participate in on a trip, are they going to be accessible to you? That's an important thing to consider. And then lastly, where are you getting your information? Is it a trusted source? There are a lot of resources on the internet. People writing about accessibility at destinations or businesses talking about their own accessibility that are simply not accurate. So it's very important to use a trusted resource for accessible travel information. I recommend starting with Google, but verifying everything that you read. Now, my website is obviously accurate, and thousands of people are using it every day to open their world. But some other resources may not be so accurate. And so I just want you to be careful. You don't want to be the victim of bad information, either, from someone, just writing about accessibility who knows nothing about our needs as disabled people, or a business, writing about its accessibility and giving it more credit than it deserves. So be careful in finding all of that information and making sure it's as accurate as possible. So 5 tips to plan an accessible vacation. We've got number 1 out of the way, researching the destination's accessibility. Number 2, learning about your equal access rights and the laws that protect them. So, we live in a time where civil rights are very important, and we're talking about them a lot more right now than we have in quite some time. And as a person with a disability, as a person with accessibility needs, we have rights too. And, these are protected by laws like the Air Carrier Access Act, which guarantees equal access in air travel, and also the Americans with Disabilities Act, which guarantees accessibility in public accommodations, whether it be the movie theater or the baseball park or the restaurant that you like to go to. But it also covers quite a bit more, like a city's public transportation services, taxis, and the like. And so I strongly recommend getting yourself up to speed on precisely what your rights are. What are you as a disabled person entitled to in terms of accessibility? What features should a business have to welcome you? How accessible should public transportation be? All of these things are very important questions that I address on my website at wheelchairtravel.org. Number 3, consider engaging with an accessible travel agent. Sometimes there are questions that, we may not be able to find an answer to. So perhaps we should turn to an expert in accessible travel, someone who's booked trips for other people and has that answer right at their fingertips. Accessible travel agents don't have to be used for every component of your trip. If you just need help with flights or a hotel, they can do that for you, and often at very little cost. Number 4, fourth tip, start a conversation with your disability peers. I would normally tell people in a presentation like this to look around to the person beside them and chat with them about where they've gone, because I feel like the best resources for accessible travel are disabled people who have already gone to the place that you want to go. And so I always love talking with other wheelchair users to figure out what their experience was at a given destination. They have those insider tips that others would not have. And so I just recommend starting a conversation with the people that you know in your community, people that you meet online and in Facebook groups and on forums, and talk to them about their travel experiences and see if you can get any tips from them about a place that they visited and that you would like to visit. And number 5, this sort of goes without saying, but there's a lot more right now, I think, that is out there to discourage us. But it's accepting the unknown, anticipating that there are going to be a lot of surprises in whatever trip that you take, and trying to focus on that enjoyment of the journey. Don't allow a single hiccup to derail your entire trip. Things are going to happen that will make things difficult, and cause frustration or a little hardship on the journey. But that doesn't have to define your vacation. Think why you went there. What did you want to go see? What did you want to do? If one thing isn't accessible, or maybe a taxi is delayed in coming to pick you up, or any number of things that could happen. Maybe the flight wasn't good. But the flight is only such a small part of the journey. And so it's putting these things in perspective and just having the courage to get out there and experience all of the opportunity that does exist out there. And so now I'd like to talk about 5 trips that I have taken in the recent past that hopefully will provide some inspiration to you, to help you figure out, what is possible, what opportunities do exist out there. These 5 trips have been especially memorable to me, and I hope that perhaps you'll be able to follow in my footsteps. Now, here on the slide you see a man on the moon, and while I'd love to do that, outer space has not been made accessible to the average man like me yet, and so I have to focus on the more terrestrial trips here down on Earth. So the first trip that I'd like to talk about occurred just last summer, when I visited Egypt and went to Mount Sinai, where Moses is said to have received the 10 Commandments from God. Egypt is not a very accessible place, but because of this London black cab, which has a ramp for wheelchairs, I was able to make the journey out to St. Catherine's Monastery, which is one of the oldest monasteries in the world, and these are some of the really incredible experiences that you might not think are possible with a disability. I mean, after I had my car accident, if you had asked me if I would be making a trip to Mount Sinai, I would have said, well, geez, I haven't even been able to make a trip to the movie theater yet, or to a restaurant. And so there is incredible opportunity and possibility out there, and I think that this trip in particular is one great example of how we can push the limits of possibility and participate in activities and go on trips that may seem entirely off limits, but that doesn't have to be the case. Prior to my car accident, I lived in St. Louis, and I'm a huge St. Louis Cardinals fan. And I talked earlier about, one of the things that I like to do is to go to sporting events, and while, we won't be doing that for a while yet, they are accessible. Baseball stadiums, football stadiums, hockey arenas, all of these things, all of these places have accessibility. And in particular in St. Louis at the Cardinals Busch Stadium, their stadium is nicely accessible with great viewpoints from accessible seats, and I always have a great time there. That's something that you can do too, no matter where you're going, what city you're visiting. I know quite a few people who have gone around to all of the NFL stadiums or all of the Major League Baseball ballparks as wheelchair users, and I think that is very exciting. Last year, I traveled with my sister to Bogota, Colombia, and that is another destination that I, would have expected to be off limits. But with my power wheelchair, I was able to get around the city. I rode a funicular, which is an elevated railway, basically a railway that goes just up the side of a mountain at a very steep angle. And I was able to go to this place, which is Montserrat It's the hill overlooking the city of Bogota. Um, it's a very beautiful place, and so in this photo you can see a lot of cobblestones, but my wheelchair is actually sitting on an accessible, smooth brick pathway that has been laid for the benefit of wheelchair users and mothers with strollers and older people who may have more difficulty walking on uneven cobblestones. And so this is the type of accessibility that I like to see. These innovations are happening all around the world, including in much poorer countries than our own, such as Colombia. Chicago is another trip that I highly recommend, and I encourage you to check out on my website the Chicago Wheelchair Accessible Travel Guide, which has detailed information about accessibility in the city of Chicago, how to get around in a wheelchair, the things you can see and do. And one of those things is visiting the top of the Willis Tower, which people generally know as the Sears Tower, one of the tallest skyscrapers in Chicago. And from here, you can look out over the city. It's a beautiful sight, especially on a day with lovely weather. And here in this photograph, I am using one of these viewfinders, a viewing telescope, to look down on the city in greater detail, to zoom in, so to speak. And this feature is accessible. It's lowered for wheelchair users, and there's space to roll my wheelchair right underneath these binoculars. And I think that that's just wonderful, and another example of incredible innovation and accessibility. Another reason that I love going to Chicago is for the pizza. And if you do go to Chicago, I strongly recommend Gino's East Pizzeria. That's my favorite. I know that others may have their own favorites, but try out Gino's East, and I promise you won't be disappointed. And a fifth trip that I also took last year was to Nairobi, Kenya. And in this photo, I'm in a sanctuary for giraffes. But what was really special about this trip is that I wasn't, visiting Nairobi just to go to a zoo. I was actually going to go on safari. And so I went on a wheelchair accessible safari. I saw so many different wild animals living their lives free from human intervention out in the wild, and that's not something I'd seen before. I got to see all of the big five, and that was very exciting because some people go on safari and they don't get to see what are called the big five. And so I saw all five of those, and it was really incredible. And I did all that from a wheelchair in Kenya, which is not a very accessible country, but thanks to a tour provider, I was able to make that happen. And so I just want to share these 5 different trip ideas with you to help you recognize that there's so much opportunity out there. And so that brings us to the end of our time today, but I'd like for you to connect with me on the web, facebook.com/wheelchairtravel, on Twitter at WCTravelORG, and on my website at wheelchairtravel.org. On this slide, I provided a list of links to information and resources that I have available online. Number 1 would be our guide to air travel, where I go into great detail about the accessibility of airline accommodations and flights for wheelchair users. Very detailed information. Accessible destinations. The website has a list of about 50 destinations where I have written detailed reviews about accessibility, including the hotels and public transportation systems, the sidewalks, the different things that you can do, the airports, and the like. So lots of information about accessibility in destinations all around the world. I also have guides to accessibility in hotels and talking about the ADA and the requirements for accessibility there. I also talk about a guide to railway transportation, so trains, getting around the US and also other countries in the world on trains. Information for people who want to travel abroad, so things that you'll want to consider before leaving the United States. I also have a monthly newsletter that you can subscribe to and get the latest updates about accessible travel. And just this month, I launched the Accessible Travel Talk Show, which is a podcast all about accessible travel with experts from the travel industry and wheelchair users and other people with disabilities who like to travel and can share their experiences with you. So you can download that or listen to it at traveltalkshow.org. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I hope you have a great summer. See you soon.